Okay, today let's talk about the different riding modes in a motorcycle. A lot of stuff is advertised that a bike has 3 modes, 5 modes, 6 modes, rider configurable modes, and all of that. But let's see how this works. And to really understand riding modes, you need to understand 3 things primarily. One is your throttle map. Second is ABS, and the third is traction control. A throttle map is essentially relation between how much you are opening your throttle and how much your throttle body is actually opening, right? So in the rain mode, when you open your throttle, let's say 40% or 50%, your throttle body is actually opening much lesser. So you feel that you've opened a lot of throttle, but to the engine it feels that only a little bit of throttle has been opened. So your response is a lot more gentle. The opposite of that happens in sport mode, where you might be opening only a little throttle, but your throttle body is opening quite a lot, or in many cases equally. Now, in most cases, in most bikes, especially in the first 30-40% of your throttle opening, you are not actually getting the same from your throttle body. This is what makes these motorcycles so much easier, and you feel in control when you're riding the modern bikes. Because especially in the beginning part, you're not, even though you are giving a lot of throttle, the bike is not opening enough of its throttle. That's how your maps are configured in terms of riding modes. In terms of rain, it will be the most gentle. In terms of sport, it would probably be the most direct. And then different motorcycles will configure their other modes differently. The next thing we come to is ABS. The way ABS works is it essentially establishes a relationship between your front wheel rotation and your rear wheel rotation when you're at a certain or any speed without any slip on either of the wheels. And that's because different bikes can have wheels of different sizes. But once that relationship is established, the minute you start to lock up the rear wheel, it senses a difference between the front and the rear. Or the minute you start to lock up your front wheel, it senses that difference. And because it's working on the brakes, it releases your brakes so that your wheel can continue its rotational motion. Now, after how much of lockup does your brake release depends on how your ABS is tuned. If it will allow you to lock up your wheel to a certain extent, then we would probably call it less sensitive. If it doesn't allow you to lock up your wheel at all and it intervenes very quickly, then you'll call it more sensitive. So in the rain mode, your ABS can be configured to be more sensitive. In the off-road mode, your ABS can be configured to be less sensitive. So that's how ABS works. Now we come to traction control. Now traction control can be called the opposite of ABS. Your motorcycle already knows the relationship between the front wheel and the rear wheel rotation. When it realizes that the rear wheel is rotating more than the front wheel, it reduces that difference in rotation by cutting off power to your engine. This can be done in multiple ways, and mostly it will be a cutoff of the spark and the fuel so that your rotation comes back, and you will feel it with a loss of power when you're giving the throttle. Again, this will have various levels of sensitivities. So in the rain mode, your traction control could be very proactive, where even a small slip is not allowed. Whereas in off-road mode, it might allow you a little bit of slip and a little bit of spin at the rear wheel before actually intervening and cutting off power. Now, apart from these three basic things, there can be other layers that are interposed on this. Like, for example, once you have a certain device to measure your lean both on the side or front and back, something like a gyroscope, then you can have other combinations of these. So you can then have different settings for your ABS and traction control when the bike is leaned over. Similarly, a motorcycle manufacturer can configure in wheelie control depending on what the angle of lift of the motorcycle is. So it can cut off at a certain point of time. And then when you're going off-road, it can allow a lot more wheel lockup, or the interventions can be very different to what you can have on the road. Same thing with traction control also. And a lot of times these things can actually help you ride without too much drama and with a certain safety net around you. Now that we know how the throttle, ABS and traction control works, let's start to understand how each map brings a combination of these three to your riding. So for rain mode, you're going to have a much gentler throttle response. You're going to have reasonably sensitive traction control and ABS. On road mode, you're going to have a slightly more responsive throttle than in the rain mode, and then you're going to have your ABS and traction control configured to regular tarmac riding. For sport mode, your throttle response will be enhanced, and similar changes might be made in the traction control and the ABS settings. For off-road mode, now your traction control and ABS sensitivity is really, really low. So it will allow for a lot more spin outs and a wheel lockups. A lot of motorcycles will switch the rear ABS completely off in the off-road mode, and some motorcycles might even allow you to do it for the front ABS. A lot of motorcycles today are also coming with a rider configuration menu, where you can select exactly the kind of map you want, exactly the kind of ABS setting you want, and exactly the kind of traction control setting you want. And some will allow you to switch all of these off, so you now have a more direct connection and feedback to the motorcycle. Whether you're skilled enough to ride in that, it's a different question, but a lot of motorcycles will give you that power and ability. Use it responsibly.